Hello, everyone. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is June, friends, and we're doing something a little bit different this month. We are going to read all of Alexandra Vasti's Halifax Hellions novellas. So we'll have a recap of one each week, and then we'll chat with her at the end of the month, and it should be really fun.
Yeah, this
So,
is I'm really excited about it because um these were free through her newsletter for a long time.
mhm.
And now they're being released on so if you want to get them, you can.
Yep. And
And
I think next year they'll be out in print as well, like as an omnibus, which is cool.
yeah, and they are stories, like at least the first two happen kind of at the same time, but to two
Hmm.
different people. And it's these twins and then their brothers, so three siblings
Hmm.
that are all gonna find love. But it's
Yes.
yeah, and we've never done like an entire like a recap of an entire story in 1 week. So
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yes, it'll be fun. So this is week one, and it is in which Margo Halifax earns her shocking reputation by Alexandra Vasti. So we open with Henry Mortimer, our hero. He's a solicitor for his best friend Spencer, who's an earl. And he's talking about falling in love with Spencer's younger sister Margo, who's one of the twins, while
It's kind
she
of like something terrible has happened to him though. And he's like, I think
right,
I could trace it back
like it's an ailment.
to the moment when like my doom was set when
Yes.
this happened.
When this happened, which was her tying a cherry stem in a knot with her tongue, which I can do, by the way.
Me too, actually.
And so ever since then, he's spent 7 years like watching Margot and her twin Matilda like flout convention and do pretty much whatever they want around the ton. And because of who they are, people just have to still invite them places and like not shun them for being, ruined or whatever. And so it's been painful for him.
But not because of how she's acting, just because he's, like, in the periphery. So,
Yeah. Well, and because
it's
he sees her, with other men and stuff and he's jealous because he loves her. Um, but it's interesting because he never begrudges her freedom. And obviously he knows that she doesn't know anything about how he feels, which is what he
by
wants, or
design.
he would have said
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
it's
Um,
by design. He is somebody who, like, was in school with her brothers, but he was, like, on, scholarship or something. Like, he
right.
he does not come from, uh, any kind of, like, aristocratic gentry
Right.
any
I think
kind
it
of
said his dad's
background.
a pipe fitter or something like that.
Mhm.
And he's managed to hide his feelings for her for 7 years. But then she shows up at his apartment one October day, soaked to the bone in the rain, and he lets her inside. And then she just hugs him and cries all over him. And he's like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
So turns out,
She takes, like, her coat super wet, so
yeah,
he is, like, almost, like, instinctively taking care of her, right? Like, he's
yeah,
taking her coat off, he's, like, depositing her in front of the fire,
yeah,
and he's obviously like, "What is wrong?"
yeah.
And she has a problem and she needs his help, and
Big problem.
he's just
Her
like,
twin has run off and it's all her fault. Her twin has eloped with the Marquis of Ashford and gone to Gretna Green. This man is old enough to be their father. Also, everybody thinks he's cold-blooded. Like there's rumors that he killed his previous wife and all this kind of stuff. And she's like freaked out that her sister has run off with this man.
she's worried,
Yes.
worried for her life.
And so her plan is to like make it to Gretna Green before Matilda so that they can like stop her from doing this. But she needs
He
Henry to come with her.
she's like, "I can bring enough money to bribe the whole town." So everyone said it, like, no one will marry her and no one will remember seeing them
No
there.
one
Like,
will
I
witness her marriage. They can't get
he's
married
like,
without
I
a
got this
witness.
suitcase, it's full of coins. And he is like, this,
He's like,
I
this is
don't
a
think this
terrible
is a good
plan.
idea.
Well, so first he's shocked that this is all happening, but then she reminds him, and also not only that it's happening, but that she's asking him for help. And then she reminds him that her brother is currently in Wales and isn't expected back for at least another week. And this obviously has a time limit on it, so they got to
Yeah.
go now.
And he's
Um,
very like, I cannot be like alone on a trip with this woman for 2 weeks. Like, what in the world? So he's like, I am very busy with work.
right. He's like, I'm a lawyer, like I'm a solicitor. I have clients that depend on me. I have responsibilities. I can't just like up and leave for 2 weeks with no notice. Like, and then she is embarrassed because of course she's like, she's a aristocrat. She doesn't have a job. You know what I mean? Like she can flit off wherever she wants all the time, and she didn't even like think about the fact that that's not as easy for him.
Well, yeah, and she definitely, it's sad because she's so like kind of chagrined. She's just like, I'm so sorry. Like I should not have imposed on you like this.
Yeah.
Um, don't worry, I'll figure it out. Like
Right.
I
She's like,
always
I'll think of something. And he's like, oh God.
and she leaves and he turns around and her coat is still like on his floor. And
Yeah.
he's just like, this woman left without even
Without
the
even her wet
meager
cloak.
protection of her coat.
Yeah.
And who knows what she's gonna do.
And he's like basically talking to the cloak. It's making him feel wretched. And he's like, oh God. And then he knows that she's still gonna go. Like he knows her. He knows she's still gonna go. And so he
Also,
packs
she
a
said
bag.
she was gonna figure it out, which means
She's gonna go by
there's
herself.
gonna be some plan.
Yeah. So he packs a bag. And he shows up, and Margo is relieved, but also worried about his reputation with his clients if they're seen on this road to Scotland in an inn together or whatever. And he, he's not worried about that. And he
No. It
insists.
is really interesting that he um I'll say that like it's painted like they're very different people,
Mhm.
but he throws all his stuff in the bag and the whole time he's like, I fold my clothes. What
Right?
has
He's
this
like,
woman
this
done to
woman has me
me?
just tossing things in a bag. I usually travel with an iron.
He leaves notes for the pertinent people before he goes to meet her. But when
Yeah.
we catch up with her, she is also leaving notes like
Hmm.
for the pertinent people. So it's
Yep.
like her
Her
brother,
brother.
and then the butler is like, Ma'am, is this a good idea?" And she was like,
Right?
"Yes,
Like,
yes,
don't do
perfect.
it.
I'm not
Yeah.
going very far." And then she's like, "That's not, I mean, strictly true. I'm not going very far, but then I'm gonna continue to
Right.
not
I'm
go
not
very
going very
far."
far in this carriage.
So anyway,
Yeah.
she
It's funny, and so they get going, and on the road, he says that they need a real plan, and while they're talking, Margot admits what she did to run Matilda off to begin with. So Matilda, was being super secretive lately, and she wasn't, like, sharing things with Margot, which has never happened. They're twins, so, like, Margot was very concerned, and so she followed
she
her
said
one
they
night.
don't always agree, but they
Right,
always like know what's up with the other one. And so
right.
this is very concerning.
And so she heard her leaving the house one night at, like, 1 o'clock in the morning, and she followed her out to the park and saw her meeting with Ashford. Um, and then she ran home. And so then the next party that they were all supposed to go to, she dressed like she was Matilda and pretended to be Matilda, and Ashford said some pretty, like,
Well,
kinky stuff to
Matilda
her.
Matilda had told her like we should drive separate. And
Uh-huh.
so she makes sure that she gets there first
Yeah,
and pretends to be Matilda, and
yeah.
yeah, he's saying some things
He's
that are
saying some pretty
making
kinky
her
stuff to her and about tying her up and stuff, and she is shocked, and she, like,
and,
slaps
like,
his face and
whipping
runs
her.
away. She's like,
Yeah,
"So the jig was up there, like, he knew that I was not Matilda at that point, you know?" So then she confronted Matilda about the whole situation, and Matilda, like, her answer was to just run off with him and elope.
yeah. Well, and
So
she told her, like, "Don't follow me," but also she was kind of like, "Mind your business."
right, yeah,
And she's not going to mind her business because now she's like, "What
right.
if my sister is getting herself into a terrible
Right,
situation?"
well, and when she shares this with him, Henry's, like, kind of came to the same conclusion that Margot did, which is that she might have these proclivities herself, but because she's inexperienced and this might be the first person that she's been with in this way, she's, like, glommed onto him even though maybe and now she's about to marry him, like, just have an affair, like, don't marry him, like, what are you doing? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah,
Um,
he's kind of like, he is very because she's like so Marco is like, Matilda is going to be like she's in danger, and he's kind of like, I mean, maybe she's not in danger, but also I see why you're concerned.
right. Yeah,
And it was kind of sweet because I think he kind of talks her down,
yeah,
but he's still like on board with like at least
right.
crossing paths and making sure that she's okay.
Yeah,
Um, anyway, I think you can already start to see how like sweet they are together.
yeah, for sure.
Um, and
Um,
he talks a lot about how that trip is, like if it was just him, he'd be miserable, but she finds like
yeah,
joy in every little thing. So
yeah,
then it's not so
It's
sad.
not as
Like,
bad. But then on the flip side, it's horrible because after a couple of days and nights, Chuck stuck together in this carriage with no like away time. He talks about how he's managed for 7 years because he'll be with her until he can't stand to not say that he's in love with her, basically. And then he leaves and he doesn't see her for a while and kind of like recharges himself and then like goes back in. So
yeah.
he's had no time to do
He
that.
said,
He's just
like,
with
his
her.
well of self-control is
Yeah.
depleted and he can't get out of there, like,
And he's a
but
mess.
he loves being with her is the
Yes.
thing, like, it's
Yeah.
terrible.
He's a mess. He's a mess. He is so hot for her this entire time, and it's becoming a problem.
And
So,
he's very much trying to be like, "You stay on your side of the carriage, and I'll
yes,
stay on my side of the carriage," but now she's
exactly.
falling asleep, and he's like,
She
"Oh, that
clearly
doesn't
can't get
look
comfortable enough to
healthy."
really sleep, and so he offers her to come on his side and, like, lay on his shoulder, which thrills her, and after a while, they start hitting, like, every hole and bump in the road, and so they're getting, like, closer and closer together, and he's like, "Oh god, this is bad," and then they hit a really bad bump, and, like, the carriage literally wrecks, like, they go flying.
So,
Um,
they were like, the whole time she's asleep, he's, like, watching her, and we already know that he has been, like, counting her freckles like they're constellations, like, he's sitting there like, she's got 5, like, buckle thingies on her dress,
right?
and he's thinking of every way that he could, like, undo those
Undo them.
buckles.
Yep.
Like, but when this stuff starts, like, jostling, she ends
Mhm.
up, like, on him,
On him.
and
Yeah.
she is like they're having a moment,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then the thing wrecks, and
They're, like, this close to kissing and crash.
it's so sad.
Um, and so at first, Margot is kind of relieved that nothing happened because a Halifax Hellion would only lead to regret for Henry, and she couldn't bear to be that for him.
Well,
She
and
didn't
she
want
was
that.
having some kinda sexy dreams about him, and she's
Yeah.
like, "Maybe because I was smelling him while I was asleep, I don't know."
Yeah.
But also, like, she was asleep, so she thinks that maybe when she woke up, he was, like, hot as
Into it.
well,
Yeah.
but she can't be sure, she was dreaming, so it
Yeah. It's all
confusion there.
very, very tumultuous. So, they send the driver on a horse to the next town to track down a new carriage and come back for them. And he tells them about this crofter's cottage that they passed like 3 miles back in case
Yeah,
they need it, and he's like, "No, no, we're gonna stay here with the horse," and the guy is like, "Okay, well, just in case," you know? And so, of course, it starts raining.
like, immediately. It's really sad too because she's like, "Oh, I hate waiting,"
Yeah,
which I felt in my bones.
yes,
Um, and he was just kind of like, "Yeah, but it'll be fine." And I think
yeah.
I it doesn't say, I don't think in the book, but I was very like, I think he just doesn't want to be like in a
In a
place that
place
has a
alone with her
bed.
again. Yeah, for sure.
Uh-huh.
And so they start walking, but it's taking forever. It's, like, further than he thought it would be. It's cold, and after a while, her lips start turning blue, and she's, like, clearly struggling, and
Well,
he
he's like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I have a blister," but it's not
it's fine.
just
Yeah. And then
yeah.
and then later he asks her if she's okay. She's like, "Oh, yeah, I can't feel my feet anymore, so it's fine." And he's like, "Oh god."
Well, he does ask her to she does kind of there's a moment where she's like, "Henry, I I can't breathe great." And
Like,
he's
"Yeah, I
just
think I need
like,
to stop."
"What? What about your blister? Just the blister worse?" And she's like, "I can't feel my feet."
So he
Which
grabs her up and he carries her the rest of the way. They finally find the cottage, and he
absolute
thinks
panic though.
yeah,
He
oh,
is
yeah,
like, "I wanna run, but I don't wanna jostle her."
yeah.
I'm like, he is just like,
He's
she's
beside
so
himself.
cold when
Yes.
he picks her up that he's just
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh no, she's
And
gonna
so as soon
die."
as they get inside, he strips her down and he puts his dry shirt on her and makes a fire, and they, like, cuddle up together in the bedclothes, like, in front of the fire. And she finally starts to warm up and they both fall asleep. And so when Margot wakes up, it's dark, like full dark, and it's still raining. And she and Henry are like wrapped up together. He's still sleeping, and she's realizing even more how like hot he is. She's like, I sort of like, it's not like I didn't know he was hot, but like it was always sort of in passing. Like I never really was like, oh wow, damn, like he looks really good. But
There
now,
at the very beginning, there's a moment where she said that she didn't always find him attractive, but that he is an attractive like, he is,
he is an
an
attractive
attractive
man.
man,
Yeah.
but then every time she touches him, up to this point, there have been, like, maybe 3 instances, 2
Yeah.
instances where she had, like, touched him for
Right. Oh,
some
like when
reason
she
or
cried on
other.
him and stuff. Yeah.
Every time she's like,
He's so
"What
hard.
do solicitors do? Because he seems very fit."
Yeah.
Um,
Really cute.
but yeah.
It's so funny. And so she's like into it. She wants him, but she doesn't want to wake him up, but she decides she needs relief. So she's sort of like reaching down, like she's gonna take care of herself when he wakes up, and she realizes that he is hard, and she just kisses him. And so, things proceed and they end up having sex, and it's pretty hot. And it's like lovely too, like it's very sweet. And so then in the morning, she's like
I
ready
want
to
to
go
say that
again.
after this, which is like half, it starts off in her point of view until they kiss, and
Uh-huh.
then it switches to his point of view
Mhm.
after the kiss. So that you see that he, like, the whole time, like, he was awake longer than she realized. Also, like, when she looks up at him, he is, like, gone.
Yeah.
So it's like the fully, like, both of them enthusiastically were in up, like,
Yeah.
up for this. But after they have the sexy times, I he says it says when it was done, he felt a painful, mindless surge of the same instinct that had driven him to warm and dry her. He needed her to be safe, to be protected. And I was like, "Ah!"
Yeah.
Because how sweet. And then
Yeah.
later he said something about how he wanted too much. He had wanted too much for too long.
Yeah.
And so it says gladness felt like fear. So you can already see that it's like he is like all
He's
the
like,
way gone for her.
yeah. Mhm. But in the morning, she's like ready to go again. She's trying to like tease him back into bed, but when he turns around and looks at her, he's like over by the fire. He looks a mess. And he's like, "You should get dressed." And she's like, "Okay." And he's like, "I'll go outside while you do." And she's like, "Okay."
That does
And
not
so
happen.
he goes outside. And so when he comes back in, she immediately says to him, "Do you regret it?" She's like, and in her mind, she's like, "God, I was going to try to be suave about this, but like, I can't help myself. I need to know right now." And she yells at him about like, "You haven't ruined me. Like, this is not my first time. Like, it's fine." You know what I mean? And he says, "It is
It
my
is
first
my
time."
turn. It
And
is my go.
it was for me, is what he says. And she is shocked because he's hot and he has a good job. And like, surely,
And so she's
that
like, "But
opportunity.
why?"
Yeah. And he's in his brain, he's like, "Oh my God, I didn't mean to admit that, but here we are." So he says,
Like,
uh,
he wanted to tell her that he was in love with her. He did
yeah,
not wanna be like, "I've never
I
slept
was
with
a
anyone."
virgin.
And when
Right.
she asked him why, he's like, "Well, I can't tell her that."
Right. Cause
Because
it's,
it's like at first he was this shy, like, he's shy, he's not
yeah.
aristocratic or whatever.
Hmm.
And then he met her and no one he's like, he had tried to like be like, "Oh, other people will be good enough," but no,
No, nobody was.
never was.
And so he's like, "You need to go ahead and eat. I stole a horse. We're gonna ride back to town." Uh, and she's like, "What?" So on the horse, she realizes that he's hard again. She's like sitting in front of him,
Yeah.
and
Well,
she's thrilled.
he's very like he asks her, "Would you rather ride in front of me or behind me?" And she is kind of like irritated with the way he's acting too. So she's like in front. And in her head, she's like, because if anyone's gonna be clinging, it's gonna be him, not me,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
but
And
once she
but then
gets
of
on,
course,
she's like, "Oh, there's a reason why we
yeah.
can't get
And
comfy
she's
like
thrilled
this."
because she thought he was like one and done with her, basically. So she makes him say what he's thinking about. And then he said, and so
Say,
yeah,
say.
and it's very sexy. And then he says, he's like, "We need to get to town so we can really like talk."
And
And so at the
she's
time,
like, we're in her head, and she's like, "I hope that by talk, it means something else
right, talking
entirely."
euphemism, maybe, but also talk. And so at the tavern they go into to eat, the woman that works there is like, "Oh, I didn't recognize you. You changed your dress." So she's like, "Oh, wait, you talked to somebody that looked just like me this morning?" So Matilda had just left a few hours earlier, on foot with a man. And so they go
She took
after
some,
her.
like, buns or something, and
Right,
so it was
Chelsea
like
buns
she
or
was like, "Oh,
something.
did you like the bread I gave you?" And she's
Yeah.
like, "What?"
Yeah. And so, they go after her toward this waterfall where I guess they told her about a picnic spot or whatever. So they find a picnic blanket and like remnants of a meal, but no Matilda. So they split up to search, but then he hears Margo scream and he like runs to find her in a panic. Turns out she picked a bad tree to try to climb, like, but she's okay. And he kisses her. And they get like super heated up and they end up having sex down like in the mud on the ground and it is hot. And afterward they're cuddling and she says next time she wants to take the lead.
Yeah,
And
well, he's asking he's like, "Do you have any pointers for me since
right?
I don't actually like,
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, I had thought that the next time I would, kind of take the lead, but
Yeah.
if you're up for that," and he's just like, "Oh gosh," and
Yeah.
he like leads back, and she thinks he's gonna maybe say something to her, but he's like all day, any day. I am so
Yes,
ready.
go
More
for
than
it.
I can
Yeah.
breathe. I want to do this again.
But so they're cuddling up and then she hears Matilda say her name and she like jumps up and is like fixing her dress. And Matilda, first of all, she's like, I mean, I just saw your ass in the air, so like don't bother. You know what I mean? Trying to like fix yourself. But then she's mad.
Also, she's like three. Like, there's only two of these hooks that are left functional. So
Right.
sad.
The five hooks, he broke three of them. And so Matilda is furious to find her there, following her after she explicitly told her to leave her be. She's like, it's my life. And I wrote down in my notes, very, but daddy, I love him energy.
Yep.
She's like, it's my life. Like, I love him. This is what I want. Like, you don't get to decide for me, basically.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Margot's kind of like, I would never stop you from like doing what you want, but it just
right.
seems so quick and so
So quick.
soon. And don't
Yeah.
you need time? And she was like,
Well, and
I've had
she's
enough time.
and Matilda's like, how is this any different from what you were literally just doing with Henry? And she's like, I see you over there, Henry. Like, don't think I don't see you, basically. And
And ugh,
and
Margot,
Margot says, I'm not marrying Henry. And I wrote, "Ouchie." Like, she's like, so she looks at him, and as soon as she says it, she's like, "Oh, fuck." Like, I didn't mean for that to sound like how it clearly sounded.
yeah.
And he's like, he won't look at her. He's like looking at the ground. But she's like, that's for another minute. Like, I need to focus on
It's
Matilda right
yeah,
now.
you get the sense that this happened in like a nanosecond. Like she
Yes.
says the thing, she realizes like,
That's not what I
that is
meant.
not what
Yeah.
I meant. But
Yeah.
then she needs to worry about Margot. She doesn't have time to worry about like she can't
Yeah.
do both.
Right.
So
And so she says to Matilda, like, why are you tying yourself to him for life? Like, just have an affair. Like, what are you thinking? You know? And and then Matilda finally is like, "Listen, I wanna get married. Like, I'm sick of being a Halifax Hellion. Like,
she's
it's
like, I don't
not
even
fun for me
remember why
anymore."
we decided to flaunt. I don't even remember why we decided to flaunt all of
And
the
Margot
like
says, "Because
society and
fuck their
whatever.
rules, that's why," basically. Like, that was the whole gist of it from the beginning.
Yeah.
And but she's feeling super rejected, even though she had just been thinking the same way about how sick she was of their reputation and the way that they continued to perpetuate it, even though it, like, wasn't fun anymore. And
Well, and like they started it for reasons. I think as we up to this point, we have like learned that like their parents had passed away. They got sent to a finishing school. The finishing school sent them like after a year sent them away because they were like a bad influence.
right,
And they just I mean, I think too, like when people are like grieving and adjusting to life, like they're, whatever decisions they're making is like halfway
right.
not, you can't be responsible for. But
Yeah,
like
well, and they
that
were
7
18,
years,
and it's been 7 years. Yeah,
yeah. So 7 years ago and 7 years of like once the ball got rolling of that being their reputation, they leaned in, but then
yeah,
also they couldn't stop it from being what it was.
yeah,
So, and she had been thinking about that, like leading up, even with Henry, like
yeah,
that she liked him, but she couldn't really see a future because he would suffer from being associated
right.
with her.
Yeah,
And so she's already been having these thoughts, but
yeah,
her sister saying like I'm sick of this being this felt very
right.
much like a rejection. I think like she's sick of
Yeah,
being associated with me even though
Right.
that's not really
Even
what
though
it's
it
supposed
wasn't totally about her. Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
and Henry kind of speaks up at that point. He's like, you guys are both selling yourself short. Like, you might have created scandals here or there, but you're nice and you're kind and people love you, including servants. Like, you don't treat them like they're not there. Like, you aren't giving yourselves enough credit, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very sweet. And Matilda, um, says that she's sure, what she wants and that Margo, like, don't follow me again. Like, this is happening. We're done talking about it. And they hug and she leaves.
Yeah, and they're like, "I miss you." She said, "I'm gonna miss you," and
Yeah.
she's like, "I miss you already," and it's very sweet
Yeah.
and very kind of bitter. It's bittersweet, I guess,
Yeah.
too, because,
Mhm. And
um
so right afterward, Margo is kind of shocked and then she's like in a panic. She feels like she ruins everything and she'll ruin Henry if she sticks around. And he wants to talk now, but she can't. She literally runs away. After she's like,
and
she says she's sorry to him, and then she runs away.
yeah. He's like, he's like, "We need to talk," and she's like, "No, thank you,"
Nope, can't
and,
do it.
like,
Yep.
takes off.
So
And
Henry
and
decides he's
he's
gonna
like,
give
"I'm
her
gonna
some.
give her an hour," but then
Yep.
he remembers that his pocket watch is broken, so he's like, "I'm gonna give her some time."
And so he does give her a little time, and then he can't find her. And so he's panicking and searching everywhere, and he finally spots her red hair partially inside like a small cave.
And she's just, like, huddled
Yeah.
in
And so
at
he
the
goes
ball.
over and he like yells at her for running off. She yells at him for staying out there looking for her, like, I'm fine, I can make my way back. Like, do you think I'm an idiot, etc. And she's like, I clearly ruined everything. Like, why did you even come on this trip? And he says, I love you. It's why I do anything, basically.
Yeah.
And gives her
And
this
she's
passion.
like, "Not to find Matilda," and he's like, "No." Like,
No, it's because I love you. Yeah. And he basically gives her this impassioned speech about how long he's loved her, um, but that he has nothing really to offer her, which pisses her off because, and she
yeah.
calls him on that. She's like, I don't care about that stuff. Like, I can't believe you think that of me. And
And she also says that if he didn't really think that if he really thought he had nothing to offer her, he wouldn't like, the kind of
he wouldn't have
person
come
he
on this
is,
trip.
he wouldn't have yeah.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have hung around near her, he wouldn't have
Yeah.
put
Well,
himself in
and
that
she says that.
position.
She's like, you've told yourself this story about our differences to avoid having to admit the truth or tell me the truth about your feelings. Like, and that's not cool.
Yeah.
And
Well,
she's
and
right, of
also
course.
because she says to him, like, "You've told yourself this story, so you have a reason to not, like,
Yeah,
involve me in this in what's happening, but also you didn't give me an opportunity to choose, and
yeah,
that sucks." And he's kind of like, "I know, I'm a coward," and she's like, "Stop it." Like, that's like,
yeah,
they have this argument that feels very authentic to arguments
yes,
between
absolutely.
people who love each other.
And he's like, and he sort of gets to what he had been trying to say throughout saying he wasn't good enough for her was that he doesn't care anymore. He wants to marry her. And he says, I want to marry you, Margo Halifax. And he gives her all these beautiful words. And he's hopeful, but she says, it's not fair to me, Henry. Like, you can't put all this on me and expect me to answer right away. Like, you've been pining on this for 7 years, and this is like brand new information for me.
And
And
she's
she's
like,
like,
"I need time."
well, she says,
So
like, I'm not saying no, like, at all, but I need time to think. And she's like, and not even just about this, like the last 7 years, Matilda leaving and who I am when she's not here, and like it's a lot.
that's who I would be by myself.
Yeah.
It's interesting because she, throughout the book, has been somebody who, like, clearly is more comfortable, like, acting, than planning or thinking or waiting.
Yeah.
She's much more comfortable in motion.
Yes.
And this, I think, is the first time that she's just like, hang on,
Hang on. I
like,
need to think
we
about it.
need to, yeah. Which
Yeah.
I think, to me, I was like, it makes me think that she really, like, this was important enough to her that she was gonna do the uncomfortable thing.
Yeah. I agree.
Um,
And so he's of course disappointed, but he understands, that she needs time. And he's like, shit, I've waited for her 7 years. Like, what's a little while longer? Like, no big deal, right? And so she's like, I want to go back to town. Will you ride with me? And he's like, no, like, you go ahead. I'll follow. And so,
so he's gonna walk back because she's gonna take the horse. And the
yeah,
thing that's interesting too is that he is disappointed.
Yeah.
He and up like as we've been reading so far, like he has been so good, and he has tried so hard, and has used his willpower and his like all of his inner whatever to like pump the brakes on himself.
Yeah.
But once they had sex, and once there was like a possibility that this like once he had seen what they could be, it's real hard for him. Like he can't go
He
back
can't
to
go
that.
back. Yeah, for sure.
So I think at that point, like it's understandable why he's like, no, we can't, we are not getting on that horse together again.
Yeah.
Like that.
No, I can't. Yeah. So, but then by the time she gets to the inn, an hour or two later, whatever, on the horse, she already knows the answer. And she and Matilda have just grew up. Like their antics were fun when they were 18 and flouting, convention, but they've grown out of it basically. They don't serve them
Yeah.
anymore.
I think
And
that's
she loves
funny too, is
Henry.
that she's like, it's too bad that I got here so much sooner than Henry, who is on foot. She's
She's
like
like, and I
ready to
love him,
tell
and
him.
I want to tell him, and he's not going to be here for a while. So she has to wait. So she goes and gets a room. She eats. She takes a bath. She buys a scandalous dress from one of the tavern maids.
So bad.
And as she's waiting for him, she falls asleep. When she wakes up, it is the morning, and she's like, oh my God, he's still not here. Like, what happened? She's frantic. So she goes down and talks to the innkeeper. Um, and it turns out there was a misunderstanding. She told the innkeeper, I'm waiting for my husband. So when the man came and said, are there any single women here? The innkeeper was like, no.
No.
So she's like, oh God. And then she's like, but he stayed here. Like he stayed here too. And he's across the street having breakfast. And she's like, okay, fine. Like, fine. So
That's
she,
like a heart attack though.
yeah,
Poor Margot. It's like,
yeah,
what?
it is. And so she like pays off a bunch of people to do things for her. And she goes and waits in his room and orders a bath. And so he busts in just as she's getting undressed and is shocked to see her because he thought she had gone back to London. When he got to the inn and she wasn't there, they said she wasn't there. Like he thought
He
she
thought
left.
she was gone for it. Yeah, like he was
And
just like,
so
oh, she went and kept on going.
she explains everything that happened. And she's like, I'm trying to take care of you. Like I got you a bath. She like ordered food. She tried to get cherries, but the innkeeper was like, I'm so sorry. We don't have any
We
this
don't
time
have
of
any.
year. And it's very sweet. And she's like, I love you. I've loved you a long time, but I didn't know myself well enough to realize it. And like you've been my constant all these years, and it's really wonderful and
It's
like so
really
sweet.
sweet.
And so they kiss and they talk some more and they have sex, and afterwards she says she wants to continue on to Scotland. And he's like, oh, have you never been there? Like, sure, we can go to Scotland. And she's like, no, idiot. Like, pay attention. I
Joanna
want to get
Green.
married.
Have
Like,
you
why are we
not
on this
read
trip?
any romance novels? Scotland equals elopement.
And so he's thrilled, of course, and it's like a really sweet ending. So yeah, I really loved it. It was so cute.
Yeah, it was great. And so if you ever have like just, a few hours that you want to spend in a really sweet and spicy book,
Yes,
it's so good.
definitely. And now the next book is about Matilda and Lord Ashford. So yeah, really excited to read that. And we'll talk about it next week.
See us,
Thanks,
come see
everybody.
us then in
Yes.
YouTube and a little bit over here on Instagram.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.